What if you don't know how to answer the question? We've had a bit of trouble with the audio, so we've only just got started. So please ask questions as we go. Ask questions by typing directly into the dialog box, and also ask questions by putting your hand up. So I'm going to give you some general tips for Q&A. I'm going to talk to you about an eloquent model for Q&A. I'm going to practice and demonstrate the eloquent model. I'm going to give you the concept of the bucket model that dovetails in to the eloquent model. And what if you don't know? So let's start, I guess, by way of introduction. Two key steps in getting ready for your question and answer session. The first one is do your preparation. As you would prepare for any presentation, as you would prepare for a job interview, you should always prepare for the questions. And it's a little bit about anticipating. It's a little bit about working out what types of questions you're going to be asked. And also, the other thing is have a structure, and that's why I'm going to teach you those two models. One of the things that I find is that people just speak in response to questions. They don't follow a logical structure. So by giving you some tools around preparation and by giving you some models or structure that you can follow, those are the two key secrets to being really effective in your questions and answer session. So general tips. First thing, do your preparation. And by preparation, know your audience. Who's going to be in the audience? Is there anyone who you've dealt with before, who you know always asks questions? Are you speaking on something contentious? Are you removing funds? Are you reducing funding to an organisation? Are you talking about change management? Are you talking about reducing staff or realigning staff? As you go through that preparation, you can already anticipate the questions that people are going to ask. If you're going to reduce their funding, you know there's going to be some unhappy or some angry people there. So really do your preparation and try and anticipate from the audience what sort of questions you're going to get. One of the preparations that I get people to say or to do is, in your topic, what question don't you want to be asked? In other words, if someone asks that question, it's really going to make you squirm, really going to make you struggle. Just anticipate that question and think, yeah, this would be a really awkward question. Prepare an answer for that question because someone will ask it. Invariably, someone will ask that question. Set the rules up front. In this webinar, I've said, please ask questions anytime, at any stage. Put your hand up or type directly into the dialog box. If I'm going to cover that content later on, I will park that question and I'll let you know that I'll get to it. So when you're presenting you before an audience, set the rules up front. If you're speaking for 20 minutes, a short period of time, maybe one of the rules will be to ask everyone, can you hold your questions to the end? I'm going to say 5 minutes at the end of my presentation for questions. So please hold those questions. If you're running a one-day workshop, then you might say, as I have, look, I'm happy to take questions anytime. We've got the ability to drill down, to explore. We've got the time to look at all your questions. So please don't hold any questions back, please, at any stage. So set the rules. Maybe you've got a big crowd in a short amount of time and you know there's going to be angry people in the room. So you might set the rule of, and get agreement within the crowd, within the group. Set the rule around, can I get agreement that everyone be limited to one question per person, please? I know there's going to be lots of questions and I want to give as many people a chance as possible. So if you're all happy, I'm going to say one question per person, and that way I'll maximize the opportunity for people to ask questions. If you do have a second question, please come and see me at the end of my seminar, or please send me an email and I'll get back to you. Now, and you get agreement, you get buy-in, so you get the nods from the audience, okay, one question per person. Now, when angry person Bill asks you a question and then you answer it, and then they come back at a second question, you can politely say, look, Bill, if you don't mind, please just hang on to that question. We did get agreement up front, only one question per person, and I want to give these other people an opportunity to also ask questions. Now, if someone does come back and ask a second question, then you know they're not playing by the rules and they're probably a genuine heckler, a genuine antagonist, and you have inferred permission to shut them down because you've set the rules up front. However, you cannot disrespect the first question and not answer it and then shut him down when he comes back for a second question. So Bill's asked a question, you have genuinely answered it. Now Bill comes back with another question and he's still angry, then you've now got permission to shut him down. So set the rules up front. Is there any parameters around how you want to have your questions received or not received? I've been to a seminar where people have asked everybody to write their questions down, and a group of people walk around and collect those slips of paper, and then they sort them into groups. And then once or twice within the seminar, the speaker will stop and address those questions. Set the rules. It's your gig, you're presenting up front, not halfway through the presentation. Up front, set the rules. Set the scope of your presentation, set the scope of your question and answers. So I'm here today to talk about the logistics and the operational side of this new policy. I'm not here to talk about the budget implications or how we're going to fund it. If you've got any questions around budgets or finances, you'll need to defer those to the finance manager. Okay, let's get started. So now, when someone asks a question, but Peter, that's going to cost us a lot of money, I can now say, look, if you don't mind, and I did mention up front, I can't answer any questions around finance. So set the scope about what you will and what you will not talk about. I've seen speakers present and then someone will get a question halfway through or at the end, and the question will be around finance, and then they say, look, in fact, I'm not here to talk about finance. That then seems like you're avoiding the topic or you're avoiding the question. If you set the scope up front in your introduction, as you do with the rules, then you can shut someone down when they ask a question outside of scope. Anticipate tricky questions. Part of your preparation. What questions don't you want to be asked? What questions would be quite difficult? If you were in your audience's shoes and the information that you're presenting was given to you around a policy realignment, around some change management, around some funding source being lost, what questions would you ask that speaker? Anticipate them. In my presentation skills workshop, I talk about walking in your audience's footsteps before you speak to them. And part of walking in their footsteps is getting to grips with the type of questions you're going to be asked. Know your topic. So do your research, be really familiar with the topic. I went to a financial seminar last night at the WACA, the West Australian Cricket Association, and the speaker just prior to presenting was reading up on the WA budget and the anticipated federal budget. So he was right across his topic as he was talking about, I guess, trends in financial planning and trends in investment and trends in growth of the markets. He really knew his topic and he'd researched it right up to the last minute. And once again, in setting the scope, you might be an expert in juvenile diabetes, but you may not be an expert in mature age onset diabetes. Then you need to set that scope and what you're going to talk about. So really know your topic so that you can plug and play. Build a bank of frequently asked questions. I work a lot with local government and with councils, and sometimes the first line of inquiry is through the telephone, and those officers that man the telephones get asked all sorts of things about noise abatement, about noisy dogs, about putting in a water tank, about subdividing land, and it's almost like they're meant to know everything. So it's about building a bank of those frequently asked questions, and not only building a bank, but also building a bank of who do I send someone who's inquiring about building or subdivision? Where do I send someone or that question, or where do I get that answer for noise abatement, for noisy dogs, for waste disposal, for garbage disposal? Where do I go? If I don't know all of the answers, then which department, which section will answer that? But having a bank of frequently asked questions can help you with your question and answer session. As a public speaking trainer and coach, I get 90% of the time it's the same questions. How do I control nerves before speaking? How can I present without notes? What do I do if my mind goes blank? Another recommendation is don't end your session with questions. So one of the scopes I mentioned was to start by saying, I'm going to speak for 15 minutes, then I'm going to leave questions towards the end. So please hold your questions to the end. But I don't mean right at the end. Save your end for your conclusion. Save the end of your presentation for your call to action, your take-home statement. So if you're speaking for 20 minutes, my recommendation would be speak for 12, allow 5 minutes for questions, and leave 3 minutes to sum up. The reason is if you end with questions, so you finish your presentation, you sum up, and you now open up to questions, if someone does ask an angry, left field, contentious question, and you don't answer it very well, or it's a little bit outside of scope, so a little bit of a red herring question, and you go down that path, and then that's the end of your time, then accidentally that becomes your take-home message. The most recent discussion, it's called the rule of recency. The most recent discussion apparently is one of the things the audience remembers. So if your most recent discussion is hijacked by a difficult left field, out of scope question that you don't handle all that well, you may unintentionally make that your take-home message. So please make sure you have that 2 to 3 minutes to sum up and get back on track. So thanks for all those questions, really great questions, some quite stimulating questions there, but my core message is the more preparation you do, the easier it is to handle your Q&A session or whatever your take-home message is. If you have an MC who says, this is how we're going to run it, you're going to speak for 40 minutes, then I'm going to leave 10 minutes for questions, then tell the MC that you'll speak for 35, you'll have 10 minutes of question, then you will have the microphone back for 5. It's not the MC's gig, it's not the MC's presentation, it's your presentation. So just let the MC know that you want the microphone back for the last, for that closing comment, that reiteration or that summation of your core message. And don't make it up. You will get difficult questions, you will get left field questions that are outside of scope or maybe outside of your expertise. Don't make it up. Q&A is not the time to fake it until you make it. And I'm going to end this webinar with what do you do if you don't know the answer? And there is quite a few strategies that you can use. But please don't try to bluff it, because people nowadays have got their iPhones and their iPads and they can just Google up. And if you pull some statistics out of the air to answer a question and they're not valid, someone may bring you to task in front of the audience and say, look, I don't agree with you. That's not right. That's not my understanding. In fact, I've just Googled the Australian Bureau of Statistics and they say the opposite. So don't make stuff up. So there's some general tips that will help you prepare for your question and answer session. Any questions? I'm going to pause for a moment. Please type those questions in. or put your hand up. So we've got a question from Kim. Yes, Kim. You put your hand up, Kim?
Hi, Peter. I'm just wondering if you have any... Yes?
Yep.
Have you got me?
Yes.
Just wondering if you have any tips for when questions get a bit personal, and you may not want to go there, but you can kind of give an answer without, I don't know, without getting too personal.
Okay. So Kim's asked a question about what happens if it gets too personal, and sometimes I've noticed that people will share with you a really personal experience, and almost the way to answer it is to get into a counselling session, and really you don't want to do that, and it may not be appropriate. So if the personal side of the question comes from an individual in the audience that may be experiencing stress in their life, I would step up and do some general advice, and I'd then say to them, and also make eye contact, look, I'd like to spend a little bit more time with you on this. Can you come and see me at the morning tea break, or can you come and see me straight after the seminar? If the personality or if the personal aspect of the question is directed to me and they want to know something about my life that's really personal and I don't wish to share, then I would once again try to chunk up the question and just do more of a generic response. If this is a common occurrence, then I would set in my scope up front, I would set the scope. I'm going to give you some strategies. I'm going to talk about the process. And I've been through this process myself. I've been through this experience myself. But I'm not going to talk to you about my journey as a person living with stuttering. I'm not going to talk to you about what it's like growing up as a person who stutters. That is my background, and I do understand fear of public speaking, but I'm not going to go into that. So please don't ask any questions about my stuttering. It's actually quite a traumatic part of my life. I'll give you all the tips for being more confident, how to overcome fear, how to be more, more structured. So I'm quite prepared to talk about that. So that could be one way I could scope to make sure that if that personal question was something that occurred quite often, and by setting the scope, I should exclude that question. And I can now say, because I've scoped it in the front, when someone asks me, so how did you get through school as a person who stutters, Peter? Look, as I said up front, I'm not going to talk about that part of my life. Let's move on. So hopefully, Kim, there was a couple of tips there. And yes, there's those people that share their personal experiences and are a little bit vulnerable, and you can see that vulnerability, and it's not appropriate to counsel them or to dwell down into their family violence, their child abuse or whatever. So you can go up to a generic type answer without getting specific and take them aside. Okay. Any other questions? Brilliant. So how to answer questions. So here's quite an eloquent model. It's polite, it's dynamic, and it's also adaptable. One of the first things I do, and I'm talking about generally a Q&A session at a seminar, at a forum, at somewhere where you're facilitating and you're the chairperson or you're the speaker or you're the leader. Repeat the question. Repeating the question is really valuable. It does three things. The first thing is, and you noticed I repeated Kim's question. When I'm repeating the question, I'm giving myself some time to gather my thoughts. One of the mistakes people do is they go straight into the answer, then they realize they've stuck their neck out, they've given a black or white answer, and they've got nowhere to go as they notice within the audience the body language changes, or as they are unpacking their answer, they realize that, oh, maybe there's a different way I could have answered this. So repeat the question. Helps you buy a bit of time. The second thing it does is, if the person, and as you look at the person and you repeat the question. If the person shakes their head from side to side, it means, no, you've got the question wrong. If they nod their head up and down, then you've got the question right. If they do shake their head side to side, you can say, look, okay, it seems that I've misinterpreted the question. Could you please repeat the question? Obviously, via webinar, I can't see your heads side to side. So if I misinterpret a question, please type it in and say, no, Peter, that's not what I meant. And as you saw with Kim's question, there's two ways I could have interpreted it. And there may even be a third way that I've overlooked. So I tried to go both ways. I tried to cover both bases. And the third reason is, especially in seminars, sometimes a person down the front will ask a question. The speaker will hear it and then they'll answer, yeah, great question. I agree completely. In fact, I think everyone in the room should do it. And no one else in the room has heard what the question is. So repeating the question buys you a bit of time, checks in with the asker of the question, and ensures that everyone also hears the question. When you repeat the question, don't be afraid to paraphrase it. And in paraphrasing it or just changing the wording a little bit, if I understand you correctly what you've asked me, it can help you make sure you've got the context of the question. Don't paraphrase the question and change the intent on purpose. That's disrespectful. Paraphrase the question to seek clarity. The second thing is creating relevance for everyone, for the whole audience. One of the things that I see is people ask niche questions, specific questions that the rest of the audience don't care about. And then as the speaker or the presenter answers that question, everyone else in the room goes to sleep. So creating relevance for everyone in the room is a really powerful tool to do, because it allows everyone to remain engaged. You've worked so hard in your presentation to keep everyone engaged, and then this specific question or this niche question, you need to make that relevant for everyone. So that's called chunking it up, and I will demonstrate to you. Be concise, so keep it simple. I probably didn't do a very good job at being concise with Kim's question. Make eye contact with everyone. One of the mistakes people do with question and answers, and even in job interviews, is they make eye contact solely with the person who asks the question. And as they speak for the next 2 or 3 minutes, they just look at the person who asks the question. And the rest of you, once again, are thinking, well, why are we here? And it becomes a two-way conversation with the asker of the question and the speaker. So the correct way is make eye contact with the speaker first. Repeat the question, see the nod, and then you deliver your response to everyone in the audience. Think of the question as the topic for a mini speech that you are now delivering to everyone in the room. Then when you finish, come back, summarize the answer, and thank the questioner. So close off the question by bringing your eye contact back to the speaker and saying thanks for the question. And I would do a closed hand gesture. So thanks for that question, Kim. I wouldn't turn my palm up and say, so does that answer your question, Kim? So does that answer your question? Palms up. You're inviting them to come back for a second bite of the cherry. And you may lose control, and that person may just keep asking more and more questions. So thanks for your question. And the other hand can go out and move up. Are there any other questions in the audience? So that's, I guess, quite an eloquent and adaptive model for responding to questions. So, can someone ask me a question? Can someone type in a question that they think I'll be able to answer? And I'll try to demonstrate that model for you. So please put your hand up or just type in the question. It'd be really great if you could type in the question so that I can sort of remember it as I go through the model. One question, and I'll go through this model. Okay, so I've got two questions. I'll try and answer both of these, thanks. And we'll start with the first question. Can you explain more about the hand gesture? So the question I have got is, can you explain more about the hand gesture that you described? And all of you at some stage will have people that want to keep coming back and asking more and more questions. So you can use your non-verbal communication to indicate that you have finished with that person. Palms up is approachable. Palms up is seeking more information. Palms up means, yeah, would you like to add any more to that? Palms down is the stop sign. Palms down is that closed gesture. Palms down is I'm now in control. And if you use the words, thank you for your question, and then you point to someone else in the room and palm up and say, there's another question over here, then that keeps you in control of that Q&A session. So palms up is inviting further questions, further discussions. Palm down and saying thank you for the question is letting that person know that you've finished with that question. So thank you for that question. So I repeated the question, the relevance. All of you at some stage will have that person who keeps asking questions. And even when you've answered that question, they want to come back. But what about this situation? Well, that doesn't make sense. And then they keep going on. So thanks for your question with that closed body language, the palm down. Will shut them down. All of you, so I chunked it up, all of you will get this heckler at some stage. I tried to be as concise as I could. My eye contact, you'll have to imagine my eye contact. First with Rosalind, then with all of you in the room, and then back to Rosalind. And I summarised, and thanks for your question, Rosalind. Mel, can repeating a question in a small group where everyone would have heard look like you're just stalling? So thanks, Mel. Mel's just asked me, will repeating the question in a small group make you look like you're stalling? And indeed, yes, it will. And I'm going to talk about that later on. So there'll be small groups. All of you will be, at some stage, you'll be in a job interview or maybe the board room meeting. And there's 4 or 5 people or 3 people in the room. You'll all have that experience. So does repeating the question look like you're stalling? Yes and no. In the job interview, most interview panel people expect you to repeat the question. So if I understand you rightly, you'd like me to give an example when I've used my interpersonal skills to resolve conflict and I wasn't able to resolve the conflict, and what would I do differently the next time? Yeah? Am I right? Good. And the interview panel will nod. At the boardroom table with 4 or 5 people, repeating the question will seem silly and superfluous. Once again, with the interview panel, make eye contact with everyone. Don't get in the mistake of just making eye contact with one person. So thanks for your question, Mel. The answer is yes and no, and I will talk about that a little bit further. One more question. Why do you just show Perth training on the newsletter? Thanks, Michelle. Michelle's just asked me, why do I just show Perth training on my newsletter? And I'm hoping that all of you get my newsletter. If you don't get my newsletter, then you should subscribe. It's free, and I give you lots of helpful tips. The reality is, in my monthly newsletter, I should put all workshops that I'm running, and the latest newsletter, as far as I know, has workshops in Bunbury, Karratha, Perth and Melbourne. So I'm not sure what's happened with your newsletter, Michelle. Please send me an email and I'll look into why your newsletter doesn't have all the workshops. Thanks for your question, Michelle. Thanks, guys, for those 3 questions. Repeat the question. We'll talk about that a little bit further. Chunk it up. Be concise. Make eye contact with everyone, and thank the questioner with that closed gesture. Okay. Adjusting the model. So this is the flexibility. No need to repeat the question at small meetings. So that was coming up. Do repeat the question at job interviews. It buys you time, and more at job interviews they're asking you those double barrel, triple barrel questions. Don't chunk up at job interviews. The interview panel that are interviewing you for a job doesn't need to know why that's relevant to them. Do chunk up at boardroom meetings. So at the boardroom meeting you've got finance, you've got human resources, you've got marketing, and you've got operations, and you've got other functions. And we're talking about budgets. And of course the budget cuts will impact all of you. So marketing, you're going to have to really watch your marketing budget. HR, recruitment's going to be put on hold. Training and development, I don't want any more training to happen this year until next financial year. Chunk it up for everyone in the room. At a boardroom meeting, if someone asks you something and it is unimportant, irrelevant to everyone in the room, why is that question being asked at the boardroom meeting? They can ask you via email or just have a chat in the corridor. Hey, I'm a bit worried about the budget and what that implication is for me. So it is okay to chunk it up. Always make eye contact with everyone. Now I said the closed gesture, thanks for your question, but let's say you're not in a tight, short seminar, you're now in a brainstorming session or you're now facilitating. Then you can use that part of the model to say, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? So you don't have to shut them down and say thank you for your question because you're now facilitating or you're now brainstorming. So as I said, this is a flexible, eloquent model. For different situations, you adjust it for that audience, for that type of scenario. The boardroom meeting, the job interview, the formal presentation, the one-day workshop, I'll take questions as we go. There are lots of other models for questions and answers that you can see on the website if you Google, but this is just one that I use a lot and I think is quite flexible, quite eloquent and very effective. Any questions while I pause for a moment? So I think it was Melissa or Mel does that question about, I guess, this model and whether to repeat the question and also around the closing down. Does that help with showing you the flexibility of the model and how it changes? Can we obtain copies of the slides? Yes, I can provide you a copy of the slides. Anyone who would like a copy of these PowerPoint slides, I'll convert them to PDF and I'll email them to you. So just email me and say, Peter, can you please send me the slides? How do you remember the process? You learn the model. You just learn the model. So let me move to this slide. So the model is repeat the question. So this is from my memory now. Repeat the question. Chunk it up. That means remain relevant to everyone. And that can be the real art. That's the real art of responding to questions. And let me give you one more example. But so repeat the question, chunk it up. Try and be concise. Eye contact with everyone in the room. And then sum up and thank the questioner with that closed hand gesture. Thanks for your question. Unless you want them to come back, unless you've got lots of time, does that answer your question? So it's really quite a simple 3-4 step process. Now let me give you another example of chunking it up. I want to talk about some research I've read. DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes. Now I'm hoping all of you are really excited by that question. So someone's asked me, so Peter, what do you think about the new DNA nanotechnology for diagnosing juvenile diabetes? Really great question. I think all of you out there would agree anything that helps our children live longer and healthy lives with their diabetes through early diagnosis would be a valuable tool. I think everyone in the community would have to agree. Early diagnosis in our kids with diabetes is a really valuable tool. See, I've chunked it up. Now I'm going to drill down. So the DNA nanotechnology, it's new. The jury's out. and I think we have to wait and see before I can give you a decision whether it's good or not. Thanks for your question. What's the hardest question you've had? The hardest question I've had is about something that I don't know, and because I'm in the speaking space, public speaking, thinking and speaking off the cuff, job interviews, people have asked me how to run effective meetings, and also how can I become confident with telephone sales and telephone marketing. That's not my area of expertise. So the hardest question that I have is around, because I do public speaking and speaking confidence, people assume I can also do telephone speaking, telephone sales coaching, or that I can do how do you run an effective meeting, and how do you keep people on task and on track and stop them from being verbose. So it's outside of my expertise. So thanks for that question, Rob. Let's move on. I want to talk about the bucket model, and this dovetails into the other model. Henry Kissinger used to say, what questions do you have for my answers? What questions do you have for my answers? And then regardless of whatever question he got, he would then pull one of the questions from his buckets. So most of you will know you'll have a question about quality, about implementation, about price, what's going to be the impact on our consumers. And as soon as you start to hear the question, you'll work out the thread or the essence of that question, and you'll pull that answer from one of your prepared buckets. So that's called the bucket model. And sometimes it could be frequently asked questions. But most times, if we can develop 10 to 12 buckets that cover 99% of the questions we get answered, even if the question's asked sort of tangentially or sort of prosaically, like they don't get to the point, but you can get that there's an essence there about where do I go for this information. So you pull out from your resources. So I've got some really good resources on nonverbal communication that I can share with you. And while they may not have asked me, Peter, what resources do you recommend for nonverbal communication? They've sort of said, look, I don't know what to do with my hands, and how do you practice and how do you learn this stuff? Look, I've got some really good resources for nonverbal communication. Let me share that with you. So it's about developing those buckets. Bucket models is popular with politicians. And Hillary Clinton, when she was Secretary of State, so she finished that job about 2 years ago. She was Secretary of State for Barack Obama in the first 4 years. And she used to also use the bucket model. Every now and then you get a question that you have not been asked before. So you build a new bucket. You add a new bucket. That's the bucket model. And the bucket model is part of your preparation. We'll leave the questions. What if you don't know? And I call this the leaky bucket. This is the leaky bucket. What if you don't know the answer? Then there's a few things that you can do. The first one is don't bluff or make it up. So admit that you do not know the answer. Agree to find out. It's a really good question. I don't have the answer, but I know where to find out, and let me get back to you. Ask a colleague in the audience. That's a really good question on juvenile diabetes. As you know, I work with adult mature age onset. I've got a colleague who's a pediatrician who is an expert in juvenile diabetes. He's sitting down the front. Bill, would you be able to answer that question? In fact, I wouldn't do that, or you may be able to do that if you've briefed that person before. Does anyone else in the audience know the question? Or do ask a colleague in the audience. The question may be out of scope. So that's a really great question. You're talking to me about using the telephone and telephone sales, telephone marketing. As I said in my introduction, I'm around public speaking on your feet. I cannot train you in using the telephone, and I cannot train you in effective meeting. That's a little bit out of scope. Follow up and get back to them. Ask your colleague who may not be in the audience. Maybe your colleague, the pediatrician, may be at work and you're going to send them an email. One thing, however, when someone asks you a question that you don't know and you follow up and get back to them, please get back to everyone. Let's say if Kim asked me a really good question. So, Kim, that is a really good question. Let me find out, and the question might be, can you share with us 3 or 4 alternative models that we could use for questions? That's a really good question, Kim. Let me find out. I do have some other models. I don't have them at my fingertips. Let me find out and I'll email them to you, Kim. How do the rest of you feel? So if you say you're going to get back to someone, you need to get back to everyone. So that's a really good question. Let me find out. And I'm going to put that answer on my website and all of you can access that question and the answer when I find out for the next month. I'll leave it on my website on the home page for the next month. Or at a conference? That's a really good question. Let me find out. I'll get back to the conference organizer and I'll get the conference organizer to email my response to all of you who attended the conference. You need to get back to everyone. So Rosalind, you've put a question, what do you do when they don't? As that happens so often. And I may have missed this just a little bit. What do you mean? What do they do when they don't? When they don't get back to you or they don't agree to find out? Could you just clarify that question for me, Rosalind? When they don't get back to you. Well, when they don't get back to you, there's not a lot you can do about it, but that speaker, that presenter, that trainer has just lost my respect and their credibility has gone down. So one of the ways, and I do another webinar on how to connect and build rapport with your audience, and one of those things is to follow up and to get back to them and to do what you say you're going to do. If they say they're going to get back to you and they don't, then I would chase them up with an email or I'd chase up the conference organizer. Peter said he was going to send us his PowerPoint slides, but he hasn't, and I would try and get access that way. Now, I haven't said that I will send you my PowerPoint slides. I have said I will make them available to those people who email me, so I'm putting the onus on you so that I don't forget. Maybe I'm cheating a little bit, but when you send me an email, I will send you a copy of my PowerPoint slides in a PDF format, if you would like those. And someone asked about the newsletter. Please email me and I'll get back to you and I'll resend the current newsletter with all the workshops. So one way is to put the onus back on the audience. And I've seen speakers say, those of you who would like a copy of my PowerPoints, here's my email, just send me an email and I'll reply to all of those people. Sometimes they do things called crowdsourcing of notes, and they invite people that would like a copy of notes to submit their notes in a scanned document, and then someone will collate all the notes from a conference and they'll make them available to those people who submitted their notes. What happens is about 70% of people don't submit their notes. And then later on, if they complain and say, look, you know, I didn't get those notes, but hang on, you didn't put your notes in. So that's one way you can sort of alleviate the responsibility as a speaker, as a presenter, as a trainer, by putting the onus back on the audience. Look, I'm really happy to help you. Please contact me and I'll get back to you. If they don't get back to you, then if I don't get back to you, then I would imagine that your respect in me would go down. My credibility as a public speaking trainer and coach would also suffer. And you might tell someone. One happy customer tells 8 people. One unhappy customer tells 20 people. Just being aware of time. So just want to move on. Oh, and of course, and if it's a new question, add this question to a new bucket. So don't bluff, don't make it up. It's a new question, it's valid, it's not outside of scope, it's within scope. Then add that to your bucket. And your bucket list will gradually grow. Your bucket model, when someone asks you a really brilliant new question, then you need to add it. It's okay to not have the answer once, I think. Someone asks you a valid question, then find out and then add it to your bucket list so that when someone asks you that question in the next conference, then you do have the answer. I'm not going to learn how to do telephone skills, however, because that's not my job, that's not my scope, so that will not become a new bucket. So Peter, how can I appear confident and do effective sales calls over the telephone? I'm not going to add a bucket for that. That's outside of my scope. Feel free to type in any more questions. And so this is about you embedding some of the learning. 4, 5, 6 things you've learnt, write them down. The best thing to do is to grab 2 of them. What level of preparation could you do? Do you want to do a bucket list? Do you want to practice that model? And practice those 2 things that are most useful from the webinar over the next 3 months, 12 weeks. That's about how long it takes to embed new learning. So the question about how do you remember that model, you might have to practice it for 3 months and get someone to throw you questions and just sort of one by one tick those steps off, and then you'll be ready to use it in a real Q&A session. So just spend a moment and feel free to type in or to comment on what's been, what's your 1 or 2 things that you might work on. I'd be really interested from what I've taught you so far, what 1 or 2 things might be valuable to you the next time you're before an audience, before a job interview panel, being put on the spot and asked to respond to questions. So setting the scope, the rules up front. And that's a real easy thing to do. I'm here to talk about this. I'm not here to talk about that. That's someone else's business. I've only got 20 minutes, so please hold those questions. And I know there's lots of questions. Please hold those questions to the last 5 minutes. And those of you who have additional questions, please email me. Eye contact with everyone. Next time you're at a seminar or some sort of meeting where you watch the speaker solely engage the ask of the question, just watch what happens with the rest of the audience. This webinar is just a small subset of one of my one-day workshops, Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. I've also got the full Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff workshop online as I do my presentation skills, and it's 5 modules that you sort of self-paced learning over 5 weeks or 5 periods. They could be 5 months, 5 fortnights, 5 weeks, 5 days. I sell that on my website for $97. So the Q&A is just one little subset of Thinking and Speaking Off the Cuff. And that way you don't have to worry if you can't attend one of my workshops, if you're in Karratha or timing's wrong. You can cover the same content within online in your own self-paced learning. So my workshops that apparently didn't go out on the last newsletter, which I do apologize, I'll have to recheck what happened. These are some events that are coming up at any time. If I don't put them in the newsletter, you can find them on my website. And sometimes the newsletter goes out once a month, and I'll schedule 1 or 2 new workshops after the newsletter's gone out. So Michelle or Kim, I can't remember who it was, or Mel, please feel free to go to the website. So www.peterdew.com/events, and you'll see all the upcoming workshops. Karratha, Bunbury, Melbourne, a fair bit. Not doing any work in June or early July. I'm traveling to America to do some professional development around nonverbal communications and around presentation skills. So I'll fire up sort of mid to late July for the next round of workshops. However, there will still be newsletters even though I'm outside of Australia. 5 minutes. for the last few questions. A few more comments have also come in. So Dion's going to set the scope up front and prepare the bucket model. So when you're working in difficult areas, in corrective services, within disability, within funding, you know there's going to be those difficult questions. So try and get those buckets that you can just roll out. Adapt your language to suit the audience. And part of that is about walking in their footsteps. And also chunking up. So when you're answering, so a really niche DNA nanotechnology question, make it relevant to everyone. Make it relevant to everyone. Any last questions? Any last comments? And I'll be happy to let you all go 3 or 4 minutes early. Any final questions? So, as with most things, it is your preparation. It is your preparation. It is using a model rather than just willy-nilly answering to questions. So if my model's not the model for you, do Google other models. I said I have extra resources for non-verbal gestures. Are they available on my website? No, they are not. So what I'll do is I will to everyone, so I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to get back to you. I'm going to give you a list of some non-verbal communication resources, books that I use, and I will make them available to you. The other thing is there is a website, not a website, there is a webinar that I've run previously on effective use of non-verbal communications. If you would like me to run that webinar again, please send me an email, and probably the first webinar I run in July could be non-verbal communications, where I will also reference those 3 or 4 books that I have, and I'd also walk you through some really powerful high-level non-verbal communications. Some other comments: don't use big words to make you look good. I really agree with that, and I'm not very good at big words. I struggle with small words, so I think keep it simple is really good.